Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Challenge of the Dragon, brought to us by Color Dreams. Now Color Dreams is one of those companies that made unlicensed video games for the Nintendo. This also included the games they made under the title of Wisdom Tree, which were some Bible-related games. Some of these unlicensed games were created by Color Dreams themselves, or were brought in from the black market over in Asia. Most of their games end up being pretty poor with bad controls, bad music, and just overall really no fun in the gameplay. This happens to be another one of those types of games. At the beginning of the game, we get to see a small cutscene to give us a little bit of the storyline that goes on in the game. Yep, a pretty standard story. We have to vanquish evil that is trying to take over the land. Now the game has multiple levels, and at the beginning of each level you see a map screen showing you where you are in the game, and you move each square at a time to each next level. The controls in Challenge of the Dragon are rather simple. You can jump or attack. There are several different attacks, including a jump kick which you can do when moving forward, as well as some sword presses, as well as also another jump kick if you jump in the air and press the attack button that way. The thing about it is, pulling off different types of attack is almost impossible, and you can pretty much just mash the attack button in order to hurt enemies. The hit detection is extremely off in this game, and you'll find yourself as well as enemies flying all over the place when you attack them. All the items in the game look the same. They look kind of like upside down light bulbs. I assume they're supposed to be potions. Now sometimes these potions are different colors and they'll give you health, as well as you can get grenades that you can use in order to hurt all enemies on screen. You can also get ones that will give you extra lives. Here's our first mini-boss of the game. This wizard is actually kind of a preview to the final boss of the game. Now this boss can be a little bit troublesome because he shoots out some rings that can be a little bit trouble to dodge. However, it ends up being extremely easy of a battle because all you have to do is follow him around, wait for him to transform, and as soon as he comes out of his transformation, hit him one time and he'll immediately go back into it. It will take a while and you have no idea exactly where he's going to land. Especially later on in the game, the boss itself can actually fly around the room for a minute or so before he'll finally land and you'll be able to get in a hit. Once he freezes still and starts flashing colors, you know you've defeated him and we complete stage number 1. The hearts in the upper left corner of the screen represent your health. Now eventually they max out at about 5 hearts or so, but you can keep picking up health items and it seems to keep giving you health even though it doesn't appear there. Because it seems like later on I take a lot of damage before I actually end up losing any of these hearts. These pink enemies are rather simple to deal with. Just get in close and start mashing the attack button. Hopefully you can get lucky and knock a bunch of them backwards into any of the pits that are around. You know you've defeated an enemy when he goes through the ground itself and finally goes off screen. Before that, he'll just bounce around the screen all crazy like before you can finally destroy him. In the top center of the screen you can tell that I have one of those potions available, which is a grenade. I can throw that and it'll do a little bit of damage to the enemy. This gargoyle is the second boss of the game. He flies back and forth across the screen, and if you try to chase him down, you'll pretty much never be able to catch him, so it's best just to wait on the right side of the screen for him to show up, attack him, and then he'll fly back to the opposite side, wait again for him to charge forward, in which case you can just easily jump over him and deliver another attack. It'll take a little bit, but chasing him down is just a lot harder than just waiting for him to come to you. Stage 3 is where the enemies start to pick up a little bit in their difficulty. These green soldier enemies are pretty much the same type of enemy as the soldiers that were pink and gray that we've seen earlier, but this stage also introduces the ninjas. These ninjas are only in the first few levels of the game, but they're extremely annoying. They move very quickly, are hard to hit, and launch out ninja stars in your direction to hurt you. When you have one on screen, it's usually not too bad that you can chase him down and deliver the hits to him. The key is really to focus on the ninjas first if they're in your way, because they'll just stand on the opposite side of the screen and keep launching ninja stars at you while you're trying to take out the other enemies. This is where things start to become a little bit more tricky, because now we have to take on two of the ninjas at one time. If you can get lucky, it's good to try to bunch them up together and get them stuck together, in which case you can actually attack both of them at the same time. However, when they spread apart and you have one on one side and one on the other, it can sometimes be almost impossible to get in there and actually deliver hits to these guys. When you get later on, you actually have to fight 3 ninjas at one time. It's best to then have your grenades ready, because you can use them at that point and they can really be effective hurting the enemies. During this portion of the stage, I like to usually get the other enemy that's not a ninja bunched up with one of the ninjas on one side of the screen and work on that side till he's done. There really is no effective way of maneuvering or attacking in this game, because it really, like I said, is just a button mashing affair and trying to hit them before they end up hitting you. The hit detection is really off in this game, because sometimes you'll look like your sword hit him right in the head and you'll miss, and then sometimes you'll kick from a foot or two away and you'll actually be able to hurt an enemy. This fight here against the 2 ninjas as well as that knight is actually the boss battle of this stage. At any point if you get low on health or lives, pick up that green vase on the top right corner, because that actually is an extra life. Try to do your best to avoid as much of the throwing stars as possible and focus on one ninja first, and once he's done, then you can really change your focus onto the second one. Once we finish off the ninjas, we've completed the stage and move on to level 4. In level 4, we have a new variant of the ninjas. These red ninjas are pretty much the same, as they'll jump around as well as throw throwing stars at you, but these ones can also throw out bombs. When they throw out one of these bombs and it bounces across the ground, wherever it stops it's going to explode, so be sure that you're not over there when it does. The good news is they usually like to throw them away from them, so when you're focusing on fighting the ninja itself, the bombs will usually end up landing on the opposite side of the screen from you. By far, the worst thing when it comes to these ninjas is not really just the throwing stars, but actually being able to get close enough and actually hit them. As you can see, they take lots of hits to take out, and they bounce around so crazy that it can sometimes be almost impossible to land hits. Honestly though, level 4 is probably the toughest of the game. If you can get past this one, the game starts to get easier after this stage. This game can get rather boring and very frustrating very quickly during this stage. At this point, when you have 3 ninjas on screen at one time, you can lose a lot of health and lives really quickly if you're not careful. Like before, our first goal is to use up any of our grenades if we have them, and then try to get the ninjas to bunch up on one side of the screen. Run to that side, try to land in hits against any of the ones you can, and then follow them to the opposite side of the screen to continue trying to hit them. Hopefully, doing this strategy will allow you to dodge a lot of their projectiles, including ninja stars, and the not so effective bombs, as well as save some of your health. Thankfully, they also gave us a little bit of health at the beginning of this area, so make sure that you pick up those vases when you get low. After defeating all those ninjas at once, it's time to move on to stage number 5. Stage number 5 has the Green Knight enemies again, as well as it introduces a new enemy type, the Giant. The Green Knight enemies are pretty much just like our simple, really easy to deal with enemies. Chase them down, they move rather slowly, and deliver your hits to them. The Giants can be a little bit annoying. They first start off in the background and come out usually from behind a column. The thing to do against them though is to hit them on one side of their body, then quickly walk through them to the opposite side of their body and hit them again. This way, by switching it up, going from left to right and right to left, you'll be able to avoid most of their giant club shots. They also bring down falling rocks every time they slam their club. However, with the columns set up and the platforms, the rocks end up hitting those platforms above you and end up not hitting you at all. The second giant that you run across usually ends up being a little bit more of a pain than the first one. If he starts bouncing around though, if you actually are lucky enough, you can get him up in the right corner of the stage, in which case hitting him will be a lot easier. If you can't get to the right side of him when you're hitting him from the left to avoid the club, just back away a second, wait for the club to swing down, and then continue your assault. When standing on the top platform, the rocks falling down can definitely injure you a lot, but once you deliver the final hit to the giant, you knock him off screen, get a lot of extra health items, and move on to the next stage. In this level, we have a new enemy, the Raiden-esque enemy. As you can see, this guy looks like Raiden and shoots lightning. When he's far away from you, he'll turn and try to fire the lightning shot directly at you. If it hits you, it does really minimal damage, but the best way to avoid it is just jump right over it and continue trying to hit the enemy. You also have these soldier-type enemies that you'll have to deal with, but those are pretty much your typical enemy that we just deliver a lot of hits too fast, and really don't have to avoid too much of his attack. Just like all the other enemies in the game, the best strategy is really try to bunch them up on one side of the screen, hit them, and if they run to the other, go attack there. We pretty much are just going to be rinsing and repeating that same strategy throughout the whole rest of the game. Thankfully, the other soldier enemies really here aren't too much trouble. They are a little bit harder to beat than maybe some of the ones we saw really early in the game, and even the Green Knights from the previous stage. But most of the problems really aren't too bad. If you get bunched up and they keep hitting you a lot, bouncing you back and forth, that's a good time to use one of your grenades to back them all off of you, so you can have an easier shot of picking one off. At the end of the stage, it's time for another boss battle. This large Griffin Rider is pretty much an easy enemy because it fires direct at you and you can pretty much jump over all its projectiles. What I like to do is jump in the air and deliver a kick to it, and usually it'll jump right up and end up dropping right into my foot, so I end up doing damage to it. While it may not be the best strategy, it ends up working rather well against this particular boss, and if he gets stuck on you on one side of the screen, just deliver another hit while standing still, and cause him to bounce off and go to the center of the screen again. It takes a good amount of hits, but once you take care of them, you move on to the next level. In this stage, the boss from the first level, the Wizard, makes another appearance. However, he's the common enemy in this stage. The strategy we used against him in the first level pretty much remains exactly the same. Deliver an attack and try to dodge his rings that he shoots out at you, then just wait patiently for him finally to land in his transformed version of himself so you can deliver a hit when he stands still on a platform. When facing off against one of them, it's rather easy. However, as we move closer, you'll have to take on two of them at one time. The strategy remains the same, but what I like to do is try to hit one of them, get him to transform, and then go after the other one. If you're able to get a good timing on it, you can actually just keep going back and forth hitting one, then the other, and so on and so forth. With the wizard enemies flying all around for most of the time you're fighting them, It ends up being a rather easy level overall, however it gets quite boring waiting and waiting and waiting for them to finally appear so you can actually hit them. Just be very careful that when they do throw out the rings, you don't end up getting knocked back into one of those pits. Unfortunately though, these are one of those enemies that you can't knock into a pit and kill them instantly, because they'll just teleport out of the pit and start flying upwards again. This is the final area of the stage against 3 wizards at one time. Be careful not to fall off the edge on the left side, and if you can get all 3 wizards to appear at once, use your grenades because it should help you out some. We have only 3 more levels to go, and in the beginning of this stage we have a new type of enemy. It ends up being, I think, the only female villain that we actually have to fight against. She jumps around kind of like the ninjas, but not nearly as bad or difficult, but she doesn't have a projectile, so she ends up being a lot easier than the ninjas that we were battling. We also have some skeleton warriors that will come to life, and you'll have to take those guys out as well. They pretty much work like the normal fighting type enemies, however they are pretty quick, so you have to be pretty quick on the button mashing as well in order to actually do damage to them sometimes. On this portion of the screen, we have to face off with 3 of the skeleton warriors at once. Like I said before, they can be a little bit quick on the draw, so it's good to have a couple of grenades to hit them first before going in and trying to attack them. When fighting with the skeleton warriors, sometimes you don't want them to bunch up while you're fighting them directly on, because they can seemingly get a couple of hits in on you at one time, so you end up getting knocked back away from them. The final portion of the stage can be rather tricky because you have lots of enemies to take on at once. This is the first time in the game where we have actually 4 on-screen enemies to battle with at one time. Grenades will greatly help us out, but if you don't have them, just kinda get down to the bottom area and start attacking the best you can. Once you wipe out all the enemies on screen, we move on to the second to last stage of the game. The graveyard has some more of the skeleton type enemies, and they're pretty much the exact same as the level before. The only difference between these and the last ones are, when they jump up in the air, which they like to do a lot it seems like, sometimes they can drop bones on you to do damage. All this level is the red skeletons. There's no other types of enemies in the level. So if you get used to them pretty early on and have no trouble with them, you won't have too much trouble as the level goes on. The thing about it is pretty much just always keep attacking, because when they land on you, you may be able to hit 1, 2, or even all 3 of the skeletons at one time with one single attack. You may get bounced around a lot, but thankfully you should have a good amount of health at this point, so they won't drain your health and lives too quickly.
Once you've killed about 100 skeletons, we can move on to the final level of the game. The final stage is a little bit different than the other levels because there's really no enemies to fight except for the final boss. There's some flying skulls at first, which if you just keep running to the right, you'll be able to avoid all of them. Take the bottom path and try to do your best to avoid these little archer-like imps that are going to try to hit you with their pitchforks. Use a grenade if you need to at any time to completely wipe them off of the screen. Just keep moving to the right and try to do your best to do the awful platforming that you need to, and when you reach the end, it's time to do battle with the boss. Like I mentioned before, this boss is pretty much just a giant form of the wizard that we fought earlier on in the game. However, there is one major difference which makes this tough. The whirlwind type move that he does when he transforms can actually hurt you, so you have to be careful and not let it run into you while you're jumping back and forth between the platforms. Now normally you wouldn't be able to move the screen over, but if he's teleporting to the right or left side of the screen and you start moving towards him, it will cause the screen to scroll. While it may not seem like a big deal, unfortunately the farther you move over to the left, there's going to be less room for you to stand and more room for him to be able to hit you. Like I mentioned before, sometimes he can whirl around for a long time before he'll finally come to a platform, allowing you to actually do some damage. When you get about halfway through the battle, he'll change from blue to red. The only thing that's going to change up at this point is when he stops and tries to attack, he'll launch out this orb that'll home in on you and you'll have to avoid it. The orb's not too much trouble, but it can knock you off platforms like the skulls and knock you back into pits if you're on a smaller platform. The final battle of this game can take a long time because it can take forever for him to finally appear so you can actually do damage to him. A lot of the time he likes to hang out the bottom part of the screen and he'll never come up for some reason. Just keep moving around or waiting for him to finally come up because eventually he will spawn so you can actually hit him. Once you deliver the final hit, he'll explode just like the other enemies in the game and we can enjoy the ending. Like most of the Color Dreams games, there's not much of an ending, but at least it actually has one, and it's better than some of the other Color Dreams endings I've seen. And with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoy.